In terms of scope management, we've talked about a lot of things so far, except how to define the scope. We talked about planning for scope management, requirements management plan, collecting requirements, but now let's talk about actually defining the scope. And the scope is your baseline for future performance. It's what the project is all about when it comes to the work that's going to be done on the project. We know the requirements. We know what the end result has to do. It needs these specific features, or the project has to have these specific results. But what work do you need to do to make that happen? It's important that the scope statement includes as much as you need, not more or less than necessary. And the project charter can help with this as well. The project charter is this macro view, and the scope is a little more refined view that focuses just on the work to be done, not necessarily the budget and all the other things that are in the charter. So if we look at the scope statement, which is where you really come down to defining scope, there's some elements that you might want to include, like a scope description, user acceptance criteria, information on project deliverables, and the scope is going to become more clear over time as more information becomes available. On page 212, there's a couple different examples of a scope statement. And when we look at writing the scope statement, time and cost are a little more straightforward, but the scope is a little more fluid. It's tough to nail down exactly, especially at the beginning of a project. But the more you can get it nailed down through proper planning, the more successful your project's going to be. The scope statement you develop later in class won't be quite as in-depth as what's in the book. I like to think of it, again, as this short summary of the work that you're going to do on the project. So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I heard you're working on a project, what's it about? The scope statement will be your description of the work that you're going to do on the project, not all the stakeholders and the sponsors and the budget and timeline and things like that. So in the opening case, the computer upgrade is the target that you're trying to hit for the computer upgrade. And then the requirements are the specific elements of what that upgrade actually involves. If we look at the idea that project management is expectations management, which I've mentioned a few times in these videos so far, the scope is here's what to expect in terms of the work that we're going to do. It helps ensure customer satisfaction, and it helps to make sure everyone involved knows the outcomes. It's difficult to agree on scope, though, because two people might have different ideas of what the work you should be doing on a project really is. Once you've got the requirements for a project and you know what the end result should do, once you've got the scope and you've got a sense of all the work that you need to do to meet those requirements, it's time to create a work breakdown structure so you can actually manage the work or manage the project. And this Calvin Hobbes comic here just, I don't know, I like it as an example of how scope can change over time. I'm a Calvin Hobbes fan. I think it's a great comic. So the work breakdown structure, that's a big component of managing scope, because that's when you actually list all the work that you're going to do to meet that scope target. And I mean literally list all the work. It's where you take everything and break all the tasks that you need to do for the project down as far as you can so that you know who's responsible for what and who is the point of contact on various work packages that need to be done on the project. The work breakdown structure lists all the work required to accomplish the scope. And you can organize and divide the work into logical parts based on how it's going to be performed. Work should not be done on your project unless it's on the work breakdown structure. Now, the work breakdown structure can be linear, but doesn't have to be, and there's no correct way to make a work breakdown structure. If you're the type of person that wants a correct answer all the time, you've probably realized by now that maybe there's a little too much ambiguity in all this for your personal preference. But again, there's a lot of different ways to do a lot of different things in project management, including making a work breakdown structure. But as you look at this, don't overthink it. It's logical. You need to do work to make the project happen. What needs to be done and who's going to do it. You've probably made work breakdown structures for other projects that you've done, and you just didn't think of it in that formal term. If you've ever done a project with friends, if you've planned a road trip, if you've planned something for a club here at OSU, you've probably assigned work to different people. And you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and we need this by this day and time. That's a work breakdown structure. And there's no correct way to do it. There's no one single piece of software that you need to always use to do it. But as long as you're taking the work that you need to do for your project and breaking it down so you can track it, that's a work breakdown structure. As you're making a work breakdown structure, you can use decomposition, which is subdividing deliverables into smaller pieces. So we need to upgrade the computers, but that means do these various tasks involved in upgrading the computers. And now you can assign those tasks and even break those tasks down even further and assign them to people. You can look at the scope baseline, which is the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and the work breakdown structure dictionary, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There's a couple of methods of organizing the work breakdown structure: product areas and project phases. These are just some terms that come in handy as you develop a work breakdown structure. This chart here doesn't really illustrate a work breakdown structure. It's more of a flow chart than a work breakdown structure. To explain all this, I'm going to use a couple examples, and those are going to be the next few slides that begin the next video. But the point here of all of this is that as we learn about managing scope, as you look at managing the scope in a project, one of the most critical elements of that is breaking down the work so that you know all the things that need to be required, or all the things that are required that you need to do to accomplish the scope and make sure your project hits those requirements targets. And the work breakdown structure is your way of getting the work broken down so that you can manage it.